We are trendsetters, pioneers, some might say.
We were doing it before it was cool.
It's true. It's true.
I am incognito this week in a different part of the state, and hence I don't have our normal recording equipment. So if you are listening to this and going, the normally exceptional level of professionalism and recording quality I have come to expect from the armchair producers seems a bit subpar this week. That's it. I'm recording on my iPad from a undisclosed location, and we have to make do with what we can get. So we apologise if it's not up to our usual levels of crapulence. You'll indulge us, if you will.
Absolutely. Now, just for everyone playing along at home, shall we say, last week we watched the Spike Lee directed, rather more mainstream, traditional Hollywood-ish movie, The Inside Man, co-starring Denzel Washington, Clive Owen, Willem Dafoe, Christopher Plummer, who was our connection from the previous session of Star Trek, Jodie Foster as well. So it was a real ensemble cast, and it was my turn to choose where we were going next. And in spite of one or two very subtle elbows to my ribs, I did not go to Serenity like certain Travis wanted us to. I decided it was a good excuse for me to finally get around to watching Spike Lee's BlackkKlansman. So that is our chain movie for this week. It is Travis's turn to choose a movie branching off from this time, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I have gone down one hell of a pulp session this week. Not the band, no. The pulp novel collection. I decided, you know what, I'm actually going to watch Lovecraft Country, the TV show, and I have many wonderful thoughts on that. But I also decided to consume the book that it's based on, which is a very, very quintessential classic pulp novel, very in line with a lot of H.P. Lovecraft-style stories.
Yeah, I say it's Lovecraft, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not quite as Victorian as H.P. Lovecraft stuff, but it's definitely got that more kind of entertainment side of things to it. So it's an interesting comparison, the changes they've made from the TV show to the book. And Travis is going to talk a little bit about It Chapter 2 and some more of The Crown. And we did decide that we were going to actually listen to Bruce Springsteen's new album. So we'll have a few thoughts on that.
And I did have a listen to The Knife on your suggestion after last week.
Oh, yes, that's right. I forgot about that one. So let's get straight into it, shall we? And let's go and talk about BlackkKlansman.
People might remember I've reviewed this in the past, and I was effusive with my praise. I really liked this film. I thought it managed to straddle a very nice line between paying homage to sort of blaxploitation films. If you're not familiar with those, you're probably not a Tarantino fan, because he's obviously something he's drawn upon quite a great deal for his work.
Absolutely.
At the same time as having that sort of really racially charged message that Spike Lee... just quick heads up, at some point in this review, I'm going to call him Spike Jones. And I'm going to apologise in advance. But Spike Lee's normally racially charged message is right there front and centre in this one, in a way in which it wasn't with Inside Man last week.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, it's funny.
I think that is its true power, in that it does have all of those elements that you talk about, but it is so entertaining to watch that you can't help but be affected and learn from it in so many ways. Like, especially this week, I've consumed a lot about kind of racial segregation in the Lovecraft Country and this. And it's just a part of specifically American culture that I don't really know except what I've seen in Hollywood movies, which is never particularly...
not the most reliable source of history, is it?
Not the most reliable source. And it's fascinating seeing people use that as not only for a political message, like Spike Lee so often does, but also for entertainment and engagement. It is brilliant balance of that. You can't help but be really invested in the story, and you do. I felt like, wow, I want to know more about this divide and the struggle because it is fascinating. It is a horrendous experience that is still going on. Let's be honest, and especially the ending of Black
Well,
Klansman.
that's the message of his
Ooh,
film. Is that
yeah,
this fight isn't over. So
yeah,
our usual
it's
step back
incredible.
for a second.
Mm.
Ron Stallworth, an African American police officer from Colorado Springs, Colorado, successfully manages to infiltrate the local Ku Klux Klan branch with the help of a Jewish surrogate who eventually becomes its leader. Actually,
Mm.
based on actual events. So it's based on the book by Ron Stallworth himself. Um, we have a cast here. Ron Stallworth is played by John David Washington, who we talked about a week or two ago, who was in Tenet.
Mm-hmm.
I think is fast becoming a leading man in Hollywood. We have Adam Driver, who I think is now a leading man in Hollywood, and a
Mm-hmm.
very, very fine actor. Other well-known actors you know in this, we Topher Grace, Alec Baldwin. The rest of it's sort of, character actors whose faces you might know. And a big shout out to Laura Harrier, who plays Patrice
Mm.
in this film. And you're 100% right, but because the key message that Spike, I think, wants to take away from this film is that this is set in the early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's kind of funny to see the concept of a black man joining the Ku Klux Klan and basically ripping its balls off.
Yeah.
But I mean, just spoiler alert here. If you don't want to know anything about what happens at the end of this film, this is not actually the end of the story, but this is, I guess, what one might call an addendum to the film.
Mm.
And I would say, just to add to I mentioned blaxploitation. I mentioned the racial message. I mentioned how funny it is. This is also an incredibly emotionally affecting end to the film, or
Oh
an
yeah.
addendum to the film. So I'm going to tell you about it now. So fast forward if you don't want to know. But basically, following the actual conclusion of the story of the film, the film incorporates actual footage of the Unite the Right rally from a couple of years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia, where
Mm.
Heather Heyer, who the film is dedicated to,
Yeah.
was murdered by a right-wing protester who ran her over in his car. And there's actual footage of people in the streets marching with tiki torches, yelling, "Jews will not replace us," and white
White
lives
lives
matter.
matter. Yeah.
And then, of course, the douchebag supreme, Cheeto Hitler himself,
Mm.
saying, "Oh, we're very fine people on both sides,"
Yeah.
And whenever one of my American Trump-supporting friends says to me, "No, you're just paying attention to the mainstream media. You've just got to go and do your own research. You can see all the good he's done."
Mm-hmm.
He said Nazis were very fine people.
Yeah.
Full stop. End of the conversation. I don't give a shit what he does after that. He said
Yeah.
Nazis were very fine people. I don't care what else he does. So
Mm-hmm.
that is an incredibly affecting end to the film.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right to sort of come back to it and go, yes, the civil rights movement was 60 years ago, and this story set 50 years ago, but the ideas and the evil represented by the likes of the Klan still exists, very much still exists today, and the threat isn't gone.
The element for me of kind of juxtaposing the period setting of the movie and this essentially modern day element was just the difference between this small little group that of the KKK that the movie kind of follows, and them saying, "Oh yeah, we think that it's kind of over, and it's just like." There's a cross burning right near the end of the movie, and there's maybe like 20 people around that cross, and then you see hundreds of people marching, and it's like, no, that fucking thing survived and thrived. Unfortunately, that's just a fucking virus. It's just gone.
And they had David Duke as a character in the film. For those who aren't aware, David Duke was the Grand Wizard, or the leader of the Ku Klux Klan.
I think it's so stupid that he's called the Grand Wizard.
It is kind of lame. And in the 70s, he was the great, and he's Topher Grace plays David Duke.
Great performance, yeah.
Really wonderful performance in Topher. And he in this film, and so he actually, Ron Saul was actually dealt directly with David Duke in the 70s, and apparently David Duke didn't realize he was African American until his book came out in like 2006, which is kind of crazy. But I guess the other side of the crazy side of a coin is that there's actually David Duke was actually in Charlottesville giving speeches on the weekend of a day where Heather Heyer was murdered. Yeah. So again, just to come back to your point, if this virus hasn't been eradicated, it's still very much alive. When 50 years after the character, the same rabble rouser from the film, is still able to be taken seriously enough today that people turn up to hear him speak. Yeah.
It's this movie has got literally everything going for it. It is stunning from a production point of view. Every single shot just looks absolutely impeccable, from just the firing range sequences where the KKK are just practicing. It looks beautiful, and then having John David Washington's Ron just walk to where they were and just pick up some of the shells. It's just beautifully filmed. The audio is fantastic. The performances from all of them are absolutely on point. There is not a single person hamming it up or anything, or there's not even so often when members of the KKK are represented in movies, quite often they are not even they're always played for dark laughs, and they're not kind of notified or identified as real people that live in the real world. There's that little element of, oh no, we don't really want to show you that much truth here about this entity. I'm thinking of like a prime example of them. Yes, it was definitely more an out and out comedy, but Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And how the KKK were showed in that. There were a lot more in those scenes, and it was scary just knowing who the KKK are, what they represent, and the amount of people. But the way that I want to get his name. Where is he?
Are you talking about the guy who played Felix?
Yeah. No, I'm talking about Walter. Ryan
Eggold.
Yeah, he is really fantastic. When you first meet him, he seems like, he's in this bar playing a bit of pool, and he seems like the traditional picture of what a KKK member is. He's a very quintessential, stereotypical Midwestern guy who likes his beers and talks a lot of bad things, and he's he's got that T-shirt, white pride, white power sort of thing. But as you go with him through the movie, it's like he's just a guy. He's got fucked up ideals, but they're not playing him as a hero or a villain or anything. He is just a guy, which I think is one of Spike Lee's real powers. We talked about it last week, about every single character in Inside Man feeling like a complete realized individual. They all feel realized, even Felix, Jasper Pakkanen.
Which is interesting because he's not American. He's Finnish, I believe.
Yeah.
And I was like, no way. Wow, okay, that's an incredible performance from a guy who's not actually American, because apparently he turned up at the audition doing that accent and wouldn't tell them who he was, and had Spike Lee 100% convinced that he was an American, and that got him the part. Once he learned he was Finnish, he was like, oh my god. But you're right, like, they're not played purely for laughs. They're not bumbling Keystone Cops sort of, psych gag, setting themselves on fire and the burning cross kind of thing, though that would have been funny. They're not just evil either. They're not like, mustache twirling villains. They're not like with one-liners. Like, I'm thinking of the South Africans from Lethal Weapon 2,
exactly,
diplomatic immunity, It's just been revoked. But they, as you sort of said, they are actual rounded characters to a degree, in the sense that you could believe that these are real people and not just caricatures of or ciphers of what we want to believe a KKK are.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think that's what Mike is saying is that, and I think he says it a lot with David Duke's character. We mentioned that Topher Grace is an amazing performance here as David Duke. I think Topher's problem sometimes is he's so likable. He's such a likable guy. When they cast him as Venom in Spider-Man 3, it was just like,
yeah,
what? It was really miscast in a strange movie that it was. But I think it actually really works in his favor here. And if you read about it, like that was what they were trying to get across with his character, was that David Duke was quite a reasonable sounding and charming individual. And he was a fairly successful politician for a long time. That he didn't come across as a psychopath, racist hillbilly, in a white cape. He came across as a reasonably, a man with a reasonable proposition, a man who was an actual politician you could vote for, and he was, moving away from the, mistakes that the Klan had made in the past, and a responsible new face for the Klan, where he was the same fucking evil virus in a nice suit and a good looking smile. And Topher really pulled that off in the sense that he represents something absolutely horrible, but he's actually a very likable character. You can kind of he doesn't go around using the N-word quite so much. He's
he never loses his temper or anything like that. He's very, very level-headed. Yeah.
At one point in time, Ron Stallworth, and this actually happened, is assigned as a security detail for David Duke during his visit to Colorado Springs, and he is reasonably polite to Ron, considering he is an African American man, and that is kind of everything. Again, he's not everything the Klan hates is particularly their main target was African American people. So he at one point he gets a little bit snippy. I won't spoil that because it's a great laugh in the film. That he doesn't come across. He is the worst kind of evil, the evil that can old. But to quote the line from The Usual Suspects, that the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world it didn't exist. And that's what David Duke is. David Duke is the devil who's convincing you that he doesn't exist.
Yeah, he's just a normal guy, and he can relate with anyone, whether it's politicians or the middle class or the poor working class. He's a man who can he's willing to lend you his ear and just share interesting conversation. And before you know it, you sort of go, "Oh shit, I'm in this conversation." No, whoa, that's scary. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say it's an excellent observation that Spike does that very skillfully in this film. I mean, this is a classic film where basically it's set in the 70s, but it's got nothing to do with what happened in the 70s. It has everything to do with what's happening in the United States today.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. That is kind of Spike Lee's bailiwick in all of his movies. There's always been this element of kind of a period to his work, but it's also, everything about it is still relevant today. It's kind of timeless filmography. But this is, I can't believe that this was winner for Best Adapted Screenplay. And it was a nominee for Best Motion Picture.
I think it was for me. I think I said it at the time. I think this was the best picture of the year for me.
So this came out in 2018. So I don't know what other movies came out. That was. I'm going to have a quick look. Let's go in this 2018.
But as I said last week, this is not the kind of film that was ever going to win Best Picture. It didn't win, and hence he got the consolation prize as Best Adapted Screenplay. Yeah.
Oh no, it must be 29. Oh, that makes it really tough because this was for Oscar winners of 2018. 2019, where it got nominated. The winner was Parasite, which is
I can't speak. I haven't seen Parasite.
Yeah, that is a phenomenal movie, but it is also not as culturally important.
And it's not really what the Academy Awards are about, though, are they? It's not the film that's the most culturally important, most important film of the year. It's the best film of the year. And look, I mean, I don't know how many Spike Lee films you've seen. I think this is arguably, look, some would say Do the Right Thing, which is probably his most famous film. I have seen Do the Right Thing, and I think this is a better film and a more important film for me, considering what's going on in that country, what was going on when it was made. Thank God, so much of what was going on, well, a giant cause of a problem seems to be on his way out the door. You know, they're about to flush the giant orange turd. So, you know, kudos to Spike. He can take some credit for that. But I thought this was a masterpiece. I would go so far as to say it's got an incredible. As you sort of, I think you made a great point to start with. Is it's one thing to make a film with a great message. Schindler's List, obviously an incredible story that everybody needs to know about, and they should teach that film. I think it's Requiem for a Dream. Incredible message. I always say, show that film to every high school kid in the country and see how many of them think it's still cool to do drugs.
Yeah.
But it is not, I mean, obviously you couldn't do that. There's parts of those films, you absolutely couldn't do that. I'm thinking of Jennifer Connelly here.
Yeah.
There's stuff you just couldn't get away with that. But, like, by no means is that an easy film to watch. It is a traumatic ordeal of a picture. So anything about its message about, hey, you know, drugs might seem cool, but, like, you know, you're going to end up in some pretty ugly places. That's not going to get through because how many people are going to be able to make it through that thing? Not many. But when you insert something like this, which is a fairly heavy message about racial injustice, into a very accessible and funny and entertaining and broad comedy, essentially, and then you smack them over the head with that footage at the end, I'd like to think you get your message through to potentially more people.
Yes.
For me, over a few years ago, I reckon the best film that they made about war and terror was, or the most effective film, I should say, was Harold and Kumar Go to Guantanamo Bay. Because as good as the Hurt Locker was, I reckon more people would sit through Harold and Kumar.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. It's very, if you, what's the best way of describing this? Making it more palatable for everyone, and there's no one wants to sit down and do a 3-hour exam where they are feeling like under the pump all the time. If you are enjoying the experience of being there and learning and consuming and taking it on, you're going to remember it more. And this is one of the first movies in probably 5 years where I teared up at the end when it cut to the modern day stuff. I just teared up. It was amazing.
It was incredibly affecting, wasn't it? And I don't understand how. I guess no one can be confused about my politics, and they stand in direct opposition to everything Donald Trump stands for. But how anybody could look at that situation and say, well, his response to someone getting murdered by a right-wing protester was completely reasonable. I just don't. If that doesn't boil your blood, then maybe you're beyond help. I don't know. What? I don't know what else you could be sharing that would Anyway, but that's the topic for the guy who makes the film about Donald Trump. That's gonna come out one day.
It would be really interesting if Spike Lee did a movie about Donald Trump. Not directly Donald Trump, but about just almost more like a documentary of people living through the last 4 years of Trump.
I read a story about it in the Guardian the other day. They're like, oh, maybe filmmakers shouldn't take the obvious bait. I'm like, please. It's the biggest and most obvious story that anybody's going to have,
Yeah.
And it's just going to get better. because I always say to people, tell me he hasn't been under some sketchy ass shit while he was president. He has absolutely no respect for convention or the rule of law. His only main purpose in this is to enrich himself, his family, and his cronies. So he would have bent and broken any rule he felt he needed to on the presumption that he would be president for another 4 years and he wouldn't get busted because he's not a loser. So I am 100% certain he's been up to sketchy shit. And that's all going to come out when he's not president anymore. So the story's just going to get better. If he ends up in prison, what a story, you know. But we're off topic, unfortunately. But you're 100% just to come back on your point. You're right. I felt the same way at the end of it when it was almost like a kick in the guts. That footage of Heather being killed by that asshole protester. You know, it was just brutal, and it was. I mean, from a filmmaking perspective, it was genius.
Yeah. Absolutely. I thought, me and my curse of predicting movies, I thought that it was going to end either when the bomb went off and Ron was being beaten down, and they were just going to fade off to that, or when the burning of the cross was going to happen. I thought, oh shit, are they gonna sort of like take one of the Klansmen's masks off and it's Adam Driver's Flip character or something like that, and he's somehow been he's kind of converted to it or something, but I wouldn't have believed that, and that would have been one hell of a cheat. The fact that they left those people burning as anonymous, except for one that was obvious considering his shape and mannerisms, and then cutting to the modern, that I did not see coming, and it worked like fucking perfect. It was amazing.
As you sort of said, aside from, I think it's a spike at the top of his game, and in performances, you mentioned Adam Driver was on point for me, and it's a bit like, for me, he's like a bit like Robert Pattinson. I mentioned Robert Pattinson a few weeks ago in Tenet being my favourite part of that movie. Then the further away he gets from Twilight, you know, the bigger everyone has to start somewhere. He was young and he needed the money. So one day I suspect with Robert Pattinson we're going to go, good Lord, what were you doing with those horrible vampire movies? He's going to be, if he's not there already, he will be. And I think Adam Driver will be the same, because I've never seen Adam Driver before he played Kylo Ren. That was the first thing I'd ever seen him in. I know he was in some Skins, I think it was, the British TV show. It was a British anyway,
I don't know.
But I'd never seen him in anything before that, and I think the more I see him pop up in things now, the more and more impressed I am with his range and his acting ability. And this is him doing comedy and nailing it. I would very much like at some point to get around to seeing a Marriage Story when I, don't feel like slitting my wrists. But he was great in The Dead Don't Die, if you've seen that. He was great in The Report. He
was good in Midnight Special as well, actually. That's an underrated movie.
Yeah, that's a great film as well. So, Adam Driver, like I said, I think he is a leading man now. I think you put your name on the poster next to your whoever, and he will open your movie. Or he's probably a little bit more artsy than, but then again, he'll do some artsy. He's done Star Wars, so he's done his blockbuster thing.
Exactly. He's got those royalty checks coming in.
Exactly.
I'll tell you something. John David Washington, I knew that he was the son of Denzel Washington, but none of the Denzel Washington charm was on display for me when I watched him in Tenet.
No.
But then him talking and being Ron Stallworth in this movie, it's like, oh shit, he sounds so much like his dad, and his mannerisms are so much like his dad, because there was a big period where, particularly coming off of Inside Man, where there's a lot of swagger to Denzel Washington's character as he's moving around and talking and kind of playing off of everyone. The way that Ron plays off of the Black Power members, and even as he builds up more of a rapport with the cops around him, it's like, oh shit, yeah, there's that Denzel charm. Jeez, wow, he's going to be a talented man.
He's, like I said, I think he's going to be very much a Hollywood leading man. I think we've seen in Tenet. I thought he was solid in Tenet without being unstanding, and I don't think anything that was wrong with any of the shortcomings of his performance in Tenet were his problem. It was just a writing problem.
Yeah,
and a directorial problem. We talked about it. We don't know who he is. He hasn't got a fucking name. How invested can you get in the story of a guy who we don't even know who he is? But you're right. I thought he was really great in this. He can do comedy. He can do action.
Yeah.
I think the sky's the limit for him from here.
Absolutely agree. So moving on from there, Trav, unless you have any final thoughts.
No. I think we've sucked this film's dick enough.
But going crass, it's damn tasty. This is such a fucking good movie. Where are we going next, good sir?
I'm going to take a less obvious path, but I'm going to end up somewhere that's fairly similar. It's fairly similar territory.
Okay, Spider-Man 3, right?
Sorry, or Spider. Well, you got me in one. I consider Spider-Man 3. I am not that I'm not that evil. I am the direct caller of evil. One of the producers of this film is Jordan Peele. We're going to go watch Get Out.
Okay. Get Out. Jordan Peele. I'm surprised you're not going for Us. His new
have
one.
You seen? I have a question. Have you seen Us? Or have you? Did you see Get Out and not like it? Am I remembering that correctly?
I saw it. I kind of thought, all right, it's solid. It's not as powerful for me as what everyone was saying, but
have you seen Us?
I have not seen Us.
Okay, let's make it Us because at least one of us hasn't seen it. Let's make it Us.
Okay.
Because I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts on that. If you're a little bit medium rare on Get Out.
Okay, cool. I'm looking forward to it because that has been popping up on my recommendations, and damn, it's only 99 cents to rent it on Prime Video at the moment.
Well, I mean, it's a very highly rated film. It is a different beast to Get Out, and hopefully it gives you enough space to move on the next one because you got Winston Duke, Elizabeth Moss, people have been in other
Nyong'o is always phenomenal. She's a powerhouse. She's fantastic.
And we could very easily end up in Black Panther territory very simply. That was a simple, easy one. But that's for next week.
Yeah, lovely. All right. Now, well, keeping on the sort of like black culture train, I guess. Do you mind if I talk about Lovecraft Country?
Why not?
Fantastic. So, Lovecraft Country, the new limited series from HBO. It is based on a book by Matt Raff, I think it is. Let me just check that quickly because I want to get it right because it was really, really good. Matt Ruff. The book came out 2016. This series came out this year, and it's got an impressive young cast in it. With a lot of faces that you go, oh, I recognize them from something. Like Jury Smollett, her biggest profile thing, certainly most recently, was she played Dinah Lance in Birds of Prey. And in this TV series, she is fantastic. Everyone really pulls their weight, but she's great. I guess you'd say the leading man, Jonathan Majors, plays Atticus Freeman. He has not been in. I don't think I've seen him in anything at this point. But after his work in this, I want to see what he's done, and I can't wait to see what he does next. Because my God, this man commands the screen. He's fantastic. Courtney B. Vance plays George Freeman. He has been knocking around Hollywood for so long. He was back in The Hunt for Red October. He's been in Space Cowboys, Dangerous Minds. He was in the Versace series of American Horror Story. He was in Project Power, which was a middling Netflix superpower-ish series. But the real one that I want to call out is Kenneth Michael Williams. He's a face that you look at and say, oh, I've seen him in stuff. Like, he was in 12 Years a Slave, Assassin's Creed, he was in The Wire, he's in Boardwalk Empire, and my God, this is a true masterclass of acting and building character growth and forcing the audience to go on a roller coaster with him. Now, what is Lovecraft Country? It's a young African-American travels across the US in the 1950s in search of his missing father. The series starts introducing us to Atticus, and he has recently received a letter from his father, Montrose, Michael Kenneth Williams, saying that he is trying to track down information about the family on Atticus' mother's side. And this leads him, after a little bit of investigation, to what's referred to as Lovecraft Country, the area that's largely been agreed to be the inspiration for a lot of the places that come up in H.P. Lovecraft's work. And things go on a wonderful, wonderful journey from there. Now, I seem to remember you watched a couple of episodes of this?
I did. I thought the first episode was one of the best things I'd ever seen. And I thought the drop-off to the second episode was one of the steepest cliffs I've ever seen. The second episode was massively disappointing for me.
Fair enough. Was it that it just wasn't engaging to you, or what was it about?
It became ridiculous. Like, you know, it all of a sudden. And surprisingly, I was having a think because I know you liked it. And it's like, well, as per usual, you like fantasy. I don't. And that was certainly probably part of it. While there were monsters and supernatural monsters in the first episode, I think I enjoyed that. It still felt very grounded. It felt like, and that was kind of an interesting angle. It was almost a bit like X-Files, you know? Like, I always like about the X-Files that it was like, what if these sort of things were real? And so we're not going to go to Middle Earth. We're telling what if these monsters were real in the real world. And so that was added with the racial justice angle was really, really interesting. And then I guess where it got ridiculous in the second episode, it was like, I remember, it was like, I was bored halfway through because they just everything that's the world that's built in the first episode, they just kind of threw it away and said, actually, you know, it's some sort of evil Hogwarts or something, you know, I don't know, you know, it just sort of seemed to go completely off the rails, and so it lost that connection to reality. And I just completely lost any interest in who the characters were or what was going on.
That's very fair, and I am not surprised that is the bit that turned you off, because it goes very, very pulp, serialized. After watching all the way through this and the way they incorporated the supernatural, the fantasy elements with the kind of present time politics of everything, it made me think, oh, fuck, I want them to do this for John Carter, because John Carter is one of those classic quintessential pulp series. I think they could have some real good fun with a series for that.
I'm 100% on board with that, because you and I are the founding members of the John Carter of Mars, was actually pretty good club. And that was on TV again recently, and I got caught up watching it going, you know, the guy that got to play John Carter was shit. But you know, this film really is actually pretty good. And it would make great telly if they ever had the balls to try it. But considering how much John Carter lost, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
But the first two episodes.
But somehow we're getting an Encino Man sequel.
We don't put these things out into the real world.
We are.
No.
Pauly Shore was saying that the other day.
Yes, and I don't know what junk he recently put up his nose.
This is touche.
You know, anyone can come out. Like Trump is literally doing that right now. So like, yeah, we're going to go for a second term. It's like, no, you're not. Everyone else around you is saying no. You're the only person shouting this. So I do not trust Pauly Shore.
That's it, though. Like in the world of film, this kind of thing seems to happen a lot. You know, where like sniffing at the idea of coming to America too, or a third Bill and Ted movie, or go back a little bit further, the idea that they would make a fourth Indiana Jones film, including aliens. I mean, what kind of crazy idea was that?
Although I would be okay with, if it was literally I can't remember how Encino Man finishes, but in my mind, they put him in a freezer to try and freeze him because he just doesn't fit into the world, and he just steps out of the freezer, and that's it. That's how Encino Man 2 just starts. But anyway, back onto Lovecraft Country, because I love Lovecraft Country. This is definitely more of the series itself is controlled and manipulated and narrated in a way similar to kind of anthology stuff. Like the first 2 episodes are 100% part 1 and part 2, and it's kind of, I can see what if it was a movie, like if they just sandwich those 2 together, I think it would feel less of a jarring style change or a style manipulation from the first part to the second part, where you say Hogwarts in Lovecraft Country. But then going into episode 3, we are brought onto this very supernatural element that focuses much more on Letty's character, and each kind of episode focuses on one of the characters a little bit more, and you go on these journeys with them, and you particularly the episodes episode 4 and 5 are really pretty good. Episode 4 is called A History of Violence. After Christina mysteriously shows up at her doorstep, Letty confronts Atticus about his plans to surreptitiously return to Florida, and it's kind of bringing in more of that social issue of this is very recently after a lot of the legal segregation was coming down, but it hadn't become commonplace at all socially, so to speak. And it's really, really good. Strange Case is an adaptation of a chapter in the book called Jekyll in Hyde Park, and it's a really interesting take on the variations of being a black woman versus being a white woman, and that's got some interesting bits. But the best episode for me is called Jigaboo, and Diana, who's Atticus's cousin, gets cursed, and the monsters that she sees are so simple but fucking terrifying. This episode is possibly the best incarnation of Lovecraftian storytelling of horror that I've seen in a very long time. It is really brilliantly acted. It is terrifying without it being violent to the point of gore and masochism or anything like that. It is just chilling. It is scary because it really puts you in the mind of a young child in a time of life where it's dangerous to just walk down the street, let alone walk down the street and you're being pursued by a fucking monster. There are legitimate supernatural monsters there, but there are legitimate cops that will beat the fuck out of you just because they can and they know they can get away with it. It's really good capturing you. Coming into the end of it, it loses some of its steam in the final episode, but I still thoroughly enjoyed the whole thing. I consumed it through, and it is brilliant pulp. It is, for anyone who likes to keep realism solid and a strong set of rules from beginning to end, this is not it, because we are following characters where the rules do not apply, and the rule of the rules do not apply is consistently broken as well. So I can see why a lot of people would find this very frustrating if you're the sort of person that kind of needs that more solid structure of this is the world that you are presenting me with. Okay, cool. Oh wait, you're introducing this to it? No, that doesn't fit into the world you've shown me. I'm out. Bye.
I found that extraordinarily frustrating. It's just sort of like, hey, the world, fuck all that. Here's something else. And maybe that's consistent with the novel and the books. I'm not sure, but it didn't work for me. Like I said, and it comes back to again. The show's got to really be kind of something pretty special if it's going to, for me, because of my dislike of the world of fantasy. If you're going to be including a supernatural element, interesting. Us does do that, so and that worked for me. It's probably has a lot to do with the fact that I'm pretty fussy. But I would point out that if you look at the episode scores, they are very up and down. There's an 8.4 and a 7.1. The one episode you mentioned is an 8.3, then it's an 8.5. Then the last episode really seemed to frustrate the audience because it doesn't rate so well. I think I'm only 2 episodes in, so I couldn't say. But I get the impression from that and from what I've seen, it's an inconsistent show.
I smashed through it, I think, in 3 days, and it was a wonderful roller coaster for me to go on. Even the lulls, they was like, okay, this isn't a knock on the quality of the show. This is just a quieter episode, much like a lot of the criticisms that people had with season 2 of Stranger Things, where I think it's episode 7 where it focuses on 11, and it's all about broadening the viewpoint of the world of Stranger Things. It's actually a good episode, but it's a whole episode where you have cut from point where demodogs are coming up from the wound, and then it's like, what, seriously? We're not getting any of that, and come on, and it's frustrating. I get that, but as a storyteller, I can also get why it is important to do that for the bigger picture. But the thing that I would like to really draw to now is the book. There are a couple of very meaningful differences, unsurprising for translations of novels and things like that to the big screen. There are a couple of subtle changes, but also some much bigger ones. For example, the character of Diana Freeman, who is in the episode Jigaboo, in the books, is a boy called Horace, and that character is interesting and goes through similar problems and character progression as Diana, but the character of Diana is much better. It works better because not only is she a young black person walking the streets in a town that does not fucking want her there, not only is she being harassed by cops, she's also being harassed by sorcerers and monsters, and the fact that she's a young girl, which is always going to be a scary scenario when you're talking about everything else around you. So it just heightens everything very, very well. But for me, the big fucking changes, it is the character of Montrose, the backstory that goes into his character in the TV series is so good. It is so good. It is not there in the novel. If it is super, super, super subtle. But in the TV show, it's brilliant. It is so good to see something like that. Michael Kenneth Williams plays it so well. It is really impressive. The other big change that they have is the character for George Freeman, played by Courtney B. Vance. He's brilliant throughout the whole thing, but it's a very different outcome for that character from one material to the other. I'm not going to go into it because it is a spoiler regardless, and I want people to just experience this. But I think overall they did a really good job of taking this book, which is very enjoyable, and even more of a pulp story in the likes of Edgar Rice Burroughs and H.P. Lovecraft kind of storytelling, where it's almost like a monologue of someone just talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, like I do quite often on this podcast. But they kind of go, okay, we've got the most important elements that are the identifying markers of this story, and we're going to bring a little bit extra in. We're going to put a bit more of that social interaction into it, and they really tease out a lot of things, and I think they do a good service to the book, and it can stand very well in its own right, in my opinion. So I do recommend it for people who like more of the fantasy side of things set in the real world. This is not Hogwarts in the Midwest or Hogwarts in Chicago or anything like that. There is magic in this world. There is the supernatural element, but more often than not, the monsters that creates are nowhere near as terrifying as the ones walking around in human skin.
That's a good way of putting it. Look, as I said, I know my dad's liked the first episode. He found the second episode equally off-putting, and I don't know that he went back either. But it's worth a look for high production values.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, but again, kind of going back to BlackkKlansman, I think it's really wonderful to have this type of show, which is a fantasy. I mean, they qualify it as a drama, fantasy, horror, mystery, sci-fi, thriller. You don't get heavily black-led TV shows like this. It's so often, if there's a heavy black cast for a TV show, it's usually going to be very, very focused on a particular type of thing, and they don't often kind of bring in the sci-fi side of things to things. Like, you think about any of the most famous sci-fi shows of the last 15 years, and you're lucky if there's 2 or 3 black characters in it, and it's like, no, come on, their legacy and the heritage that they are able to inject into those characters by simply being black, it really makes things so much more interesting, because they have been through so much shit, and they are still going through so much shit. And why do you have to separate that from your sci-fi, from your fantasy? It's all part of the wonderful tapestry. I love it. I really, really love it. And, like Battlestar Galactica was praised for its political nature in a major TV show. There's no one particularly notable of African American or anything like that in the show. And it's like, well, if you're going to go politics, why aren't you using that card? Because that would be fascinating. And to see more representation of it. I mean, people loved it when Black Panther came out, because they were saying, oh, finally, a black superhero on the big screen. It's great to see that. In different stories as well. I want more of that.
For sure. Look, I mean, yeah, it's it's something different for sure. I mean, it wasn't for me, but as we know, I am a grumpy old curmudgeon who doesn't like anything. So that's really not a measure that they should be worried about.
And I'm a contrarian, so maybe they shouldn't pay attention to me.
Speaking of books and things I didn't like, we can have a quick chat about It Chapter 2, if that's okay. If you're okay with your strong recommendation there on Lovecraft Country. Technically, I did watch this for my other show, King for a Day. So if you want a deep dive on that, do keep an eye out for that episode when it comes out. And I don't normally cross over, but I don't know when I'm going to record that one, so we might as well talk about it here. Plus, it kind of fits in with what you're just talking about with books. I think a couple of years ago we talked about It Chapter 1 when that came out. I think you saw that. I know I liked it. I think we talked at the time about how that Stranger Things having that Stephen King-esque feeling, especially kept season 1, it kind of really prepared the ground for something like It Chapter 1. And that just really came in riding on the coattails of Stranger Things, despite the fact that Stranger Things is kind of so heavily influenced by Stephen King's work that an actual genuine Stephen King property came in and kind of felt like riding on its coattails. And I remember thinking, wow, that's pretty good, and we all know, and it's sort of a premise of King for a Day podcast, is you never know what you're going to get when you have a Stephen King property. You could get The Shining, or you could get Graveyard Shift. It can be out of genius or it can be god awful. We don't know. But it was a real win for me. It told, and I really enjoyed the TV show from the '90s, the Tim Curry version of Pennywise. So they got a lot of things right. The cast of young kids was great in the first one. Andy Muschietti, as the director, did a fantastic job. Bill Skarsgård was really quite impressive and terrifying as Pennywise. And it was just sort of tick, 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 tick. Yep, you've got it right. And that made all the monies. It absolutely knocked it out of the box office park. So, of course, they were going to back it up in Chapter 2 after making all that money. And I'm sorry to say that Andy Muschietti has completely and utterly dropped the ball in this picture. No, it's not all his fault, I think.
I think so. I was just going to say, I think the casting of the adult versions of the kids was really good.
Yeah, no, so you've seen this?
Yes.
Fantastic. I agree. I have no problems with the cast. We have Jessica Chastain playing the Beverly, James McAvoy playing Bill. Bill Hader is brilliant as Richie Tozier. Isaiah Mustafa is Token Mike Hanlon. And Jay Ryan is Ben Hanscom. James Ransom is Eddie Kasparak, and the very briefly seen Andy Bean as Stanley Uris, and we have Bill Skarsgård back here as Pennywise, and we have for some of the kids who are in the first one in some flashback scenes. We see the Losers Club again as the teens, the kids. So I think he completely dropped the ball here for a couple of reasons, and he was already had an uphill battle here.
Yes.
And funny enough, they make fun of it all the way through this film. The uphill battle was the second half of it is the significantly worse half of it.
Yeah.
So the original, I talked about the version from the '90s of Tim Curry. That was shot as a mini-series and shown over 2 nights here in Australia, and I assume it was done that way everywhere.
Yeah.
And the first half is fucking brilliant because that's the more interesting part of the story. So as brilliant as Tim Curry was as Pennywise, the second half of the story is significantly less interesting. And I think that one of the reasons is it kind of Stephen King doesn't know how to end a story. The end is ridiculous and doesn't really work. Cause I have read it. It was a very long time ago, and I just don't think you can film what actually happens in the book because it's a little bit too explicit, if I recall correctly. Also, because they're adults, the feeling of menace is significantly less for some reason. Like, an adult gets taken out by an evil clown, you're like, oh, well, fuck you. You probably shouldn't have been, it's all, I don't know. Like, but there's a real sense of menace when it's a small kid who's potentially going to be, eaten by Pennywise. You don't really feel the same way, I think, when they're grown-ups. So first things first, he had an uphill battle to make the significantly less interesting part of a story as interesting as the first part. He had an uphill battle of trying to make us care about grown-ups as much as we did a bunch of really awesome kids. Really hard to do. No matter how good your cast is, that was going to be hard. And to increase his difficulty, this is 3 hours long.
It's so long. You feel it.
Had to take 40, 50 minutes out of this somehow.
Yeah.
I know. And again, the book is, it's a paperweight. It's massive. And that's probably why they made it into a mini-series the first time. It was 3 or 4 hours of content in the mini-series. So there was, that gives you an idea of a degree of difficulty they're going to here. But you kind of really had to choose the parts you were going to film. You couldn't have got, I don't know how he could have looked at this and gone, oh no, I have to have a 3-hour picture. I can't possibly tell this story in less than 3 hours. The thing about horror films is very, very few of them can pull off a 3-hour runtime in my experience. You really need to get in, scare the shit out of people, and get the fuck out.
Yeah.
The longer you stay around, the less sense your story makes, and the more time we've got to go, I'm not really buying this, or, and maybe if you had a utterly compelling story here, like you did in the first half, you might get away with it. But this is 35 minutes longer than the first one. That was 2 hours, 15 minutes. This is 2 hours, 49 minutes. So It's significantly longer than the first half of a story, which we actually cared about. We were more interested in seeing. So that was probably the thing that really frustrated me the most, was how long it was and how many scenes to me felt irrelevant. So to give a bit of context, if you haven't read the book, you haven't seen the previous film, 27 years after the first encounter, the Losers Club, the kids from the first film, have made an agreement. If Pennywise comes back to Derry, their town, no matter where they are in the world, they'll come back together to fight him again and try and kill him. And so they've actually all got off, and most of them have become very successful in life, except for Mike, who stayed in Derry. They are called back as Pennywise comes back every 27 years, and Pennywise is re-emerged, and they're called back to Derry to come back and fight him. And when they get there, they don't actually remember very much about their past at all. It all starts to come back to them. But then they all go, oh, well, let's do the Scooby-Doo thing and split up and try and fight him. Or I didn't really know what the fuck was going on, but they all split up and explored different parts of the town. And all of them, of course, had separate scary encounters with Pennywise, very much like they did in the first film. That kind of made sense in the first film, because Pennywise generally preys upon children. Didn't make a lot of sense why they're all splitting up here. It seemed contrived that they're all going off in their separate directions this time. And again, there's just again and again and again, different scenes of them in spooky houses with Pennywise, taking on spooky new forms to chase them around and not kill them. So I lost count the amount of times that happened. Or the amount of fake outs. Oh, good, he's finally dead. And, no, he's not. It was so predictable and boring. And you're like, well, this film's got 25 minutes to go. You didn't kill him. So I felt like they could have easily cut some of it out. Most of it didn't work for me in the sense that I wasn't. Yeah, I remember in the first film, there are a number of occasions where you'd see, I know a scare's coming, but then you'd actually see the monster version of Pennywise appear out of the darkness, and you get this chill down, your hair stands on end, you get a chill down your spine, you're like, oh, that's fucking cool. I think I got that once in this film. And you know what, for those things to work, I needed to be getting it every time. And I just wasn't. So
and it's no disrespect to Skarsgård, because he still does a great job as Pennywise. It's just the story itself is it's shot its load by the time you start the second film, and it really has. It was sort of like, if you get to the middle of the book, the end of the first film is the high point of the story, and then you sort of slide into the hardly deeply unsatisfactory ending, which is Stephen King's trademark. And like I said, they make fun of it all the way through the film. So Bill Denborough, played by James McAvoy, is an author in this book, and there's a running gag all the way through the film. You don't know how to end your films. Write better endings. I didn't like the ending of your book. He goes into a place to buy what's the name of his bike? Yeah, and it's Stephen King that serves him. Yeah,
and he goes, no, I don't like the end of your book. I thought it was, Stephen King does cameo in a lot of his films, so it was kind of cool to see him pop up. But I'm like, that gag was kind of funny, because I'm like, that's funny, because if you do listen to King for a day, that's something we talk about quite regularly. The end of Stephen King's book, he has these amazing setups and cool ideas, and he's like, I don't know, a wizard did it. And the other high point of the film for me was at one point they cut off the head of one of Pennywise's monster forms, and the head rolls around the ground, grows a set of legs, and starts walking around like a spider. And somebody says, "You gotta be fucking kidding me!"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh my god!" I understood that reference. That one would have gone over a lot of heads, I think.
Yeah.
So, if the legs are coming out of it, I'm like, hang on, this is the thing. They've already done that, and so you get 100% pass on reusing that scare because you gave us that line.
Absolutely.
I liked that, and that was a nice little. There was also another nod to a horror classic. At one point, Pennywise is harassing someone in the bathroom and sticks his head around through a door and goes, "Here's Johnny." which was nice as well. So kudos to them for the nice little meta nods to King's other films, the fact that King can't write an ending. But, I mean, it doesn't really work in the sense that if you're making a joke about the fact that he can't write an ending, and that
you should really stick your own ending. Yeah.
It's a very thing is dragging your film down. So, yeah, look, again, like I said, the cast was fine. You know, they're just, the characters they're playing are less interesting than they are as children. Just by the very fact they are adults.
I have a suggestion, and I wonder if you think it might work. You know, the story of it is told on these two very different timelines. If they intercut between the two throughout the telling of this story, whether it's a TV show or two movies back to back, if they intercut between the adults and the kids, like the first time we meet them, it's them as adults coming back to Derry and they are being haunted, and as they slowly remember their time in Derry, that's where we get more of these episodes of when they were kids and they first encounter this, and the end of that story, the end of that telling is them saying, we're going to go back to Derry if it comes back. Leave it a much bleaker, sadder ending rather than just going, oh yeah, we're going to do this instead. Do you think that would be more palatable?
Potentially, though, I think that would be a little bit disjointed. And it's kind of like you'd be cutting from the interesting story to the uninteresting story, and you'd be then going, okay, well, you know, I can't wait to get back to Finn Wolfhard because he was cool.
I guess instead of it kind of going just at the end, it would kind of go.
I don't know what the studio was thinking of this. I mean, obviously, Andy Muschietti, not a particularly well-known filmmaker, I think, before It Chapter 1. I think that was his breakout film as a director.
But the one that got him attention was Mama.
Yeah. I think the big commercial hit, though, was It.
Yeah.
And after you make $1 squillion, like, they made a lot of money on it. I don't think it costs a lot. I don't think it costs a lot to make. I think it was a fairly reasonably priced production, and once you make that much money for them, I think the studios go, yeah, no worries, mate, a lot more. Whereas, and we talked a few weeks ago about Christopher Nolan now needs someone to tap him on the shoulder and go, people need to be able to hear the film, Chris. And someone needed to tap Andy on the shoulder and go, people need to go home to sleep, Andy. You know, and not in the cinema, preferably. So, yeah, the length of it was such a drag to me, and it just wasn't a good enough story to run for 3 hours by any stretch of your imagination. Like I said, it needed to cut 40, 50 minutes out of it for me to be a lot tighter, a lot punchier. And as I said, I appreciate he had an uphill battle to start with. So if you're like me, and I heard, and I suspected it was going to suck, because, as I said, I knew it was going to be hard to make this part of the story interesting. And then the reviews were middling. So if you're like me and you've been holding off all this time, I can't recommend it unless you are a freak who are a huge fan of Stephen King, in which case you probably already saw it, or you have a particular affinity for one of the actors in the film. It's an uphill battle. I had to watch it in over two sittings because I just had to stop. I was so bored.
Yeah, and even, you know, to the film's detriment, every time they cut back to the kids in this chapter 2, the life in the movie came back a bit more. And
it did. There's something about those characters as children which is so much more compelling than they are as adults. And like you said, there's no criticism of the cast here. They got A-grade talent here. It's just not as interesting as adults.
Yeah, absolutely, entirely.
So that was a bit disappointing. But if you want a deeper deconstruction, as I said, do tune into our episode of King for a Day whenever that fucking thing comes out. We get our shit together. That would help.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about a bit more about The Crown, or should we go on to
cover it off? You can find information on The Crown anywhere, and I won't belabor the point. We are at season 4 of The Crown. I realised when season 4 came out, I never finished season 3, so I had to chew through the back end of season 3 to get to this point. Season 3 is great, by the way. Very enjoyable. It takes a little while to get used to Olivia Colman as the Queen. I really, really like Claire Foy as the young Queen Elizabeth. Obviously, if you're going to skip ahead 30 years, you do need to change actresses. So, and Olivia Colman's fine in it, but I'll cut and say season 4 is the Charles and Diana season.
Okay.
And that's not a good thing. For me. Okay. I am somebody who always found Princess Di utterly boring as hell. Like, I have no interest in the royal family, period. I mean, and yet here I am, I watch The Crown. The Crown is great storytelling, and I think in the past I've said it's because it sort of delves little interesting snippets of history, which, I don't know anything about, or I've never heard of. Like, you sort of jump on Wikipedia afterwards and go, oh my god, the Queen met Idi Amin? When did that happen? Is that real? Oh my god, it's real! To some degree. I think in season 4, we started to really move into territory where it's a lot more contentious, the kind of things it's telling stories about. So especially two characters in the sense of Charles and Di, who are their story is insanely famous. What happened between the two of them, everybody knows. And there is a prevailing perspective on what happened between them. And this film really just sort of plays into that space. The royal family are assholes, Charles is a dick, and Diana is a poor, innocent, naive girl dragged into something she didn't understand and was treated very poorly by horrible people. There seems to be a lot of contention about whether that's true or not. So, if you're like me and don't really care about the interpersonal drama, about what happened between the two of them, did he cheat? Did she cheat? Was he really ever love her and all that kind of bizzo? Then, if you're like me and you're not interested in this, tabloid bullshit, you might find this season a little bit hard going. It's not terrible, by any stretch of imagination. The quality is still there. My God, the quality. It still looks incredible. The acting is fantastic. Direction's great. It's, for the most part... I
understand that Gillian Anderson is fantastic in this as well.
Gillian Anderson as Margaret Thatcher steals every scene she's in. I mean, I've had people texting me who are a little younger than me going, was she really like that? I'm like, yes, she was a piece of shit. And you can try and change my mind, people, but I don't know if you're old enough to remember her, but you grew up actually in the country she ran, and she was a piece of shit.
Yep.
And just happened to be a piece of shit prime minister for 10 years. We had that happen here too. But yeah, you wouldn't. And she really nails the mannerisms, the hair, the voice. She is wonderful, and there are scenes where she goes head to head with the Queen. Are brilliant. But we do spend a fair bit of time on Thatcher and Thatcherism, and that is interesting stuff to me. And that maybe it says something to me. Being a person interested in politics and history, that's the far more interesting side of it to me than the melodrama of the Charles and Diana story. And of course, you couldn't possibly ignore it, right? It's like the biggest thing to come out of a royal family in the last 50 years.
Season 4 started, like the opening title card, The Crown, Season 4. Charles and Diana have recently been married, and then it cut the face to black, and then just the word "meanwhile" just comes up, and it's just a completely different story.
All that happened in a crawl like Star Wars, It's 1981, and the
elsewhere in the royal family,
and then we pan sideways, and we have Charles. And I don't know. It would be fantastic if you had a crawl to start with. It could have got. Obviously, people find the story compelling today. People still love Diana very much. I have always been deeply fascinated about what people find so interesting about her. She's played very nicely by Elizabeth Debicki, who we talked about again from Tenet the other week. She does a very good job as Diana. She's very believable. Charles Edwards, the guy who plays Charles is fine.
It's not Elizabeth Debicki.
Isn't it?
No, it's Emma Corrin.
Elizabeth Debicki, it's right here. Princess
Lady Diana.
Maybe she's playing the younger one?
Oh, maybe.
Because there is a younger version of Di in the earliest.
Okay. There we go.
At the start of the season, but
they're censoring it for the British people. They've got a different actress doing it.
There was Emma Corrin plays here, Princess Diana, but Elizabeth Debicki, maybe it's in some of the later episodes. They must have two actresses. But I was going to say, Helena Bonham Carter remains another highlight for me. She plays Princess Margaret, and I'm very much enjoying her work because she's Helena Bonham fucking Carter, right? Like she's just class. But yeah, it just constantly comes back to the refrain about Charles and Di, and I just don't care. And I never did. So look, it's probably going to count most people in though, because most people do care. Interestingly, Australia is featured in one of the episodes. In episode 6, Terra Nullius, Charles and Di tour Australia. That's actually pretty questionable. There's a shot in Spain.
Okay.
Have you been to Spain?
Yes.
Does it look like Australia? I suspect it doesn't.
No, not really. It's. I think it's kind of. It's probably the equivalent of a spaghetti western.
And so there's a scene where they're supposed to be in Brisbane, and you're like, yeah, that ain't Brisbane.
A tapas down under.
Yeah. And they didn't come to Australia, which is fair enough. It's a long way for a UK-based production to film one episode, I guess. But they also feature Bob Hawke, who was a great Australian Prime Minister, played by Richard Roxburgh, and probably best known he was in Moulin Rouge, Van Helsing, lots of other Australian things. Wonderful actor, really pulls off Bob Hawke pretty well, except that they fictionalize all the stuff that he actually said.
Okay. So
there are like TV interviews where the character in the show says of the Queen, well, you wouldn't put a pig in charge of a herd of prime cattle, would you? Even if the Queen does wear diamonds, if a pig does wear diamonds or something like that. He never said that. He didn't compare the Queen to a pig. And he never would have. He was a far more skilled politician and diplomat than that. He was Prime Minister for a great number of years, and I happen to admire Bob Hawke greatly. Take it all with a grain of salt. But the fact that they took a thing that actually happened, an interview that actually happened, and then made him sound kind of ridiculous, I find a little bit offensive as an Australian because I don't like the way that they kind of portray Australian leaders as, kind of like, it's okay in The Simpsons where, I'm going to tell a Prime Minister about this, hey!
it's just a little kick of the thumb.
That's the bottom line argument is it's okay if you're doing satire, but if you're telling me, in an actual show like this, I didn't enjoy that. So look, it's as I said, it's still good. I haven't quite finished season 4 yet because, as I said, I just find it so hard just churning through this Diana Charles stuff. But again, if you like that kind of thing and you think they're great, you're probably going to enjoy it.
For clarification on Elizabeth Debicki, she has been cast as Princess Diana for season 5 and 6.
Season 5. See, the funny thing is, I saw her listed in the front page of it, and I'm like, she doesn't look like her. She's a lot taller in Tenet. So there you go. I'll look forward to seeing what they do with her next year when she gets run over by a car in Paris.
Well, I mean, the fact that it's being listed on Elizabeth Debicki's IMDb for season 5 and 6 is like, wow, they're stretching out that Diana stuff.
Because I think the season 4 ends about the end of the Thatcher years. And so that's the late 80s, I think, from memory.
Okay, yeah.
89, 90, I think Thatcher got the arse. And so that means they've got 2 seasons where, which they're basically going to be around 6 or 7 years. But Princess Diana before she died. She died 7 or 8 years, actually.
All right then.
Well, trust in them. They make quality telly. It's. I'll just say this: take all of it with a grain of salt. It's not. It's history. We talked about it earlier. TV and film are not a place to get a history lesson.
Correct. It takes a lot of skill for someone to be able to be an educator and entertainer all at once, and not have one control the other too much.
And that's why we are so good at what we do here.
Absolutely. We are neither professionals nor masters. We are the armchair producers. Now, should we talk about the boss?
We can talk about the boss.
Let's talk about the boss. So, Bruce Springsteen brought out his new album this year, Letter to You. And, last week we talked about AC/DC's new album, Power Up. And I said, it's very AC/DC. I say exactly the same thing about Letter to You, I think.
This is true. I suspect you don't get to recording your 20th studio record and not have a pretty good idea of the kind of music. Not too many left-hand turns at the 20th record. Unless you're David Bowie.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been really confusing if Bruce Springsteen had come out and gone, you know what? Letter to You is actually a story from song 1, track 1, all the way to track 12. It is about the chronicle of me sending my first letter to Father Christmas.
I just him just coming out like a cappella, like a dozen love songs, just, like ooh baby baby stuff, like I'm taking barbershop in strange new directions. But that would be, I think by the time you record your 20th record, you've been doing in the business for 40 odd years. You know what you like to make.
Yeah, and this is kind of classic Springsteen. Really, it's his sound, it's his feel. Everything about it is very much what he has always been, and that's not a bad thing because Springsteen has made some absolute fantastic stuff. Again, reflecting my comments about AC/DC, it's just kind of a lot to go through all, like one album, one after the next. It's much more palatable for Springsteen compared to AC/DC for me. But it's like, if you like Springsteen stuff, you're probably going to like this because he doesn't put a foot wrong. It's just more of what you know.
That's a fair point. I don't think there's any major musical left turns in this. There's not a great deal of musical variety. It's not like there's a power ballad in the middle. It's sort of folky, nostalgic. What is it? Springsteen style rock. And it does, I think that's maybe what I enjoy about it. Is it kind of and what a lot of people who are maybe Springsteen fans do enjoy. It feels familiar, but new.
Yeah.
So it's like watching an episode of The West Wing, but for the first time.
Yeah.
And when you get that warm, I know this feeling, but I don't know what happens at the end of this episode, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe something that's because I'm old, and I've been a Springsteen fan for a very long time. But not a massive one, but a fan nonetheless.
I agree. The one thing that definitely stood out to me more with this album than any of his other stuff, and maybe I just wasn't tuning into it and I just didn't notice that it was there, but for me it was a lot more of the kind of religious connotations of stuff. Like one of the songs is The Power of Prayer and If I Was the Priest and things like that. It's like, I don't remember that really being a theme in his previous stuff. I mean, he's a red-blooded American, and he's absolutely entitled to have whatever religious beliefs that he wants. But I just don't remember it particularly going in.
Sure. I don't remember a lot of overt religiosity in his previous work, but it does tend to creep into a lot of older artists. Like I remember when Nick Cave started writing a lot of songs about God and Jesus and stuff, and that's a long time ago now. But it seemed like a bit of a strange choice for him. But eventually, everyone seems to discover religion in one way, shape, or form if you're a professional musician.
It just seemed like a weird, a very unusual extreme change for a Born in the USA, where he's like really pro-USA, and so much of it is celebration.
It's not pro-USA at all.
Yeah,
that song is all about a lament of someone who's come back from Vietnam. It's actually a deeply unpatriotic song, and that was what was always ironic, is the fact that Ronald Reagan went around using it at these campaign events, and like, no one's listening to the song. It's not about, hey, we're so great, in any way, shape, or form. But you're right. It certainly. I haven't recall a lot of. By no means am I a super fan by any stretch. I dip in and out of Springsteen. But I don't recall a lot of a lot of songs about Jesus and God in there, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was just an interesting, point, and it didn't particularly distract me from it. It was like, that's a new theme for him, I think.
No, I don't think I ever thought of him as a particularly religious guy. And you're right, for an American, that's probably a little unusual because they're usually pretty upfront about it if they are.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think I've heard this thing that said this is a love letter or a thank you to his fans. So you've probably kind of nailed it with your opening point there. If you like Springsteen, you're going to like this. If you hate him, this is probably not going to change your mind. If you've never listened to Springsteen before, I don't know that this is the best entry point.
Yeah. Whereas with AC/DC, the power-up, it's quintessential AC/DC, and people who are sort of like, they may have heard one or two songs of AC/DC because of the MCU and Tony Stark listening to it on blast as he's coming into Germany. And I go, I'll listen to some of that. This is probably going to be the first one that comes up when you Spotify or any streaming service. Their new album is going to be the one that they're promoting and pushing. If you listen to it, you're going to be, cool, I want to listen to some of their other stuff. You're going to kind of feel like, yeah, they've kept it going. Whereas with this one, it's like, okay, this is interesting. Springsteen. I've heard a couple of his classic songs, but this is like it, but I don't know.
I would start with Darkness on the Edge of Town, which is one of his classics from the 80s, I think, that one. Or if you want something a bit newer, I think it's one of his deeply underrated records was The Rising, which came out just after 9/11. And actually, he wrote all the songs before 9/11. So they're not 9/11 songs, but they all seem incredibly, for some reason, very, very relevant. When they came out after the attacks there. And that one's a personal favourite of mine. And full of really good songs, but again, probably not. This is not the best first place to start for you. Then again, I'm sure if you look up Springsteen on Spotify, apart from this being new, I don't think any of his songs will actually be in the top 5 songs that he's played.
Yeah.
Dancing in the Dark, Born in the USA are probably far more likely.
Yeah. Now, last but not least, you want to talk a little bit about The Knife?
Yes. So the suggestion from you last week is to check out The Knife because you were reminded a little bit of The Knife by your experience of Pucifer. I didn't get the same feeling as you. I can see what you mean by kind of experimental. The Knife reminded me more of someone like Primal Scream, more electronic. I listened to Silent Shout, their 2006 record. It really actually had quite a strong vibe of something like Primal Scream or one of those sort of electro-anarchisty kind of vibe, as opposed to Pucifer is probably, I don't know what they are, but they're a little bit more straight-ahead rock than, they don't really have that strong electronic element, I think. At least not their more recent records, but that's not a criticism. I can see your point. It's just as I said, my first thought was this is more Primal Scream than Pucifer. I didn't like it. I like some of it, but I think the one you called out was "The Captain" was a song that was in a game trailer or something. I think
in a movie trailer.
And I was listening to this the other night after we talked, and I was like, what the fuck is this song? This song's awful. And I was like, oh, no, it's the one you said you really liked. I feel like a complete arsehole. Not for me.
No.
To take that point, then again, I never really got into Primal Scream. I bought a couple of their records because they were cool. One of those bands you were supposed to be in. If you like, especially like Nine Inch Nails, who kind of had their electronic element to them as well. You should like, people go, oh, you should like Primal Scream, and you never really, a couple of songs here and there never really did it for me. So I struggled with The Knife, unfortunately. It really didn't do a lot for me, I'm sorry.
That's all right, I won't hold it against you. But
We
next
know
time
again,
there will be repercussions.
grumpy old curmudgeon who doesn't like anything. So, keep that in mind at all times when I'm not recommending records to you. Yes, it's they definitely. I think I made the call last week about whether they were dubstep, and what I was thinking of was Knife Party.
Ah, yes. Okay.
They were in an episode of Breaking Bad, but not dubstep. The sort of a weird sort of electronica.
Experimental electronica.
Mm.
All right. Well, anything else that you wanted to talk about this episode, or we're keeping it relatively short and sweet?
I think it'd be relatively short because my iPad is uncharging itself quickly, despite the fact it's plugged in. Apple for the win. But hopefully it's been clear for our dear listeners. We'll be back next week and we'll talk a little bit about us. So it's going to be a real interesting one. I can really see that being a good conversation with you and I, because it could go either way with you on this one. This is the kind of film that splits people right down the middle. You get it or you don't.
Yeah.
And if you don't get it, you're not going to like this film. I'm going to call it right now. That's not a bad thing, right? I'm not criticizing George in advance. I'm just saying it. There are sometimes there are films that you sort of go right down the middle. If you don't pick up on, if you don't buy into what the central premise of a story is, it's just going to bore you to tears, and you're going to go, "What the hell is going on?" And this is one of those kind of films. So I'm not saying George won't like it, listeners. I'm just saying if he doesn't. If he doesn't pick it up, if you don't buy it, and that happens with me all the time, right? I don't buy the central premise of something, and it just, it loses you.
So basically what you're saying is if I don't like it, then I'm a racist.
Exactly, yes. You're a Trump supporter, and, we're going to be
terrible person.
And we're going to be cancelled.
It's just because I've always wanted to be a wizard, and then, a realization that the highest person in the KKK is a wizard? That's how you get magical powers?
There you go. You heard it here first, folks. White nationalists have magical powers.
You know what? That would be actually a really interesting premise for a book.
Okay.
just if, basically, magic was not this, it can be used for good or ill. It is something you gain just from doing evil shit. And as a byproduct of that, people who are racist, bigoted, just the scum of all society have magical powers. It'd be like the anti-X-Men.
It'd be like, Sir Robert Johnson who sold his soul to the devil so he could learn how to play guitar really well. Okay, there you go. You got a sneak peek at one of George's future novels right there.
I got to finish the current one first, though. And it's coming along well, ladies and gentlemen.
Excellent.
But on that note, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here live and for reaching us on podcast services around the globe. Next week, we're talking about us. I'm looking forward to seeing it. And until then, good night.
Good night.